Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Luke Tanen, Executive Director of Chicago Innovation, and I'm excited to welcome all of you to today's virtual Chicago Innovation event, Improv Your Life, or as you might have read it, as Improve Your Life. We would argue that those two words are very closely linked these days, and in today's event, you will hear why. While most of us are not trained in the art of improv, we have found ourselves having to figure out how to improvise on the fly, stay focused amidst complete uncertainty, and find new ways to cope with changing conditions that seemingly come at a moment's notice. And none of that is easy. So today, we brought together some masters of adaptability and reinvention to share insights on how we can all evolve with the times. Now, if you have a question for the panel, please send it to us via the Zoom Q&A. We're going to save the last 15 minutes for audience questions. We also received many questions from you in advance, so we'll have those on hand too. And we also want to hear the thoughts from the audience. So keep an eye out for a couple polling questions that we'll be sharing too. Now, before we get started, I want to thank our year-round Chicago Innovation sponsors who play a hugely tremendous role in supporting all the great work of innovators and entrepreneurs in the Chicago Innovation community. Starting with our founding diamond sponsor, Theron Technology Solutions, as well as diamond sponsors SMS Assist, Accenture, and Wintrust. Gold sponsors Comcast Business and Exelon. Vetter Price, our silver sponsor. Bronze sponsors Thompson Coburn, Energy BBDO, Crown Castle, and Granger. And our media partners, WBBM News Radio, Crane Chicago Business, NBC, Clear Channel Outdoor, and Intersection. Now, I'd like to zoom it over to our co-founder of Chicago Innovation, also the president of Kuczmarski Innovation, Tom Kuczmarski.
Wow, we sure are glad you could join us today for this great event. The reason we're putting on this event, Improv Your Life, is because all of us have one thing in common these days. We're responding to a lot of challenges in everything we do. We're all facing problems at rapid speed. And that's one of the things that I love about improv. I've heard it described as creativity in real time, performed by people who train and adhere to processes to improve their reaction speed and reach positive outcomes. And that's what we're focused on these days. And we were able to bring together today 4 great speakers who really are experts at understanding innovation, improvisation, and reinvention. And let me introduce each one of them now. Kelly Leonard is the Executive VP of Second City Works. Kelly has produced hundreds of original reviews with talent such as Stephen Colbert, Tina Fey, Seth Meyers, and Amy Poehler. He wrote the acclaimed book, Yes, and co-leads a partnership with the University of Chicago on behavioral science through the lens of improv. Kelly's a great friend of Chicago Innovation and has worked with us many times before. You'll learn a lot from him. Next is Hedy Kraemer, former CEO and chairman of Baxter and currently the clinical professor of leadership at Northwestern's Kellogg School of Management. Hedy also teaches a great course with me in the executive ed program called Sustaining and Leading a Culture of Innovation. Hedy is the executive partner with Madison Dearborn Partners, was named the 2008 Kellogg School Professor of the Year, and has authored 3 books, including his most recent, which just came out, called Your 168, Finding Purpose and Satisfaction in a Values-Based Life. And our third speaker, and such a great friend, is Hedy Ratner. Hedy is the founder and co-president emeritus of the Women's Business Development Center, an advocate and activist for women's issues for more than 40 years. Hedy was appointed by President Clinton to the National Women's Business Council. The WBDC is the largest, oldest, and most comprehensive women's business assistance center in the entire US. And our moderator for the event today is Orlando Saez, CEO of Aker. Orlando has had an adventurous career across startups, large corporations, and government, and he currently leads Aker, a precision crop diagnostic data and service company that combines farming and drone technology. It's really incredible. Orlando is also a board member for Chicago Innovation and a judge of the Chicago Innovation Awards. Speakers, thank you so much for coming today. Orlando, over to you.
Thank you, Tom. And let me start by saying that it is a privilege for me to be here with Hedy, Harry, and Kelly. And just for everybody to know, preparing for this event and learning more about you has been incredibly rewarding. And I'm sure that the audience will enjoy the same. So let me establish the rules for today. It's going to be pretty simple. We're going to go through some topics. We're going to get personal. We're going to improvise. We're going to keep it real. We need to have fun. We'll interact with the audience. Like Luke said, we're going to have some polling questions, and we're going to spend some time with Q&A so we can interact more. So we want to keep this lively, short, and real. When we ask everyone here, when you guys register, what was your favorite quote and what does it mean? And we received some awesome responses, by the way. And we're going to share those with you so that you can have the benefit of those quotes. So thank you for that. What we want to do probably is go around this panel and the folks that we have and start with a perspective on what is your favorite quote and what does it mean for you. So let me turn it over to our Northwestern Wildcat fan, Harry. What is your favorite quote?
Sure. Good afternoon, Orlando, and thanks for doing this. It's great to be with everybody. I got a lot of favorite quotes, so to pick a favorite was a little tough, but the one I think about now more than ever is the Gandhi quote, "Be the change you want to see in the world." Mm-hmm. And with all the things that are going on, I tease the students a lot, Orlando, that we say, all these issues and all these problems we have, who's going to deal with all these issues? And there always seems to be this famous or infamous group of people called those guys, some other group of men or women. And I'm always trying to get people to realize we are those guys. We are those guys. So if you don't like what's happening, you name it, what's going on, are you watching the movie or are you in the movie? And I think Gandhi set it up very, very well. Be the change you want to see in the world. Don't watch the movie, get in the movie.
I love that, Harry. There is a sense of ownership there, and that's a theme that we're going to hear, not just from you, from other people, as to one of the things that is important in this. How do you improvise your life? So this is awesome. Kelly, how about you?
So I've got a new one. I didn't go old, I went new. And this is by Francis Frey and Ann Morris, who have a new book on leadership called Unleashed. And they say in the book, the future of work depends on our willingness to exchange the gift of each other's transformation.
That's
wow.
Fantastic.
It is so powerful. And this idea that we have the possibility to transform. And I think that's the thing that we're worried about today. And I think that's for a lot of people thinking it's not possible, but it is, and it's a gift, and it's hard. But you have to show up and do the work.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Thank you for that. Hedy, how about you? I'm sure that you have a lot of quotes.
There's something similar in all of ours. One is, this is Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Fight for the things that you care about, but do it in a way that will lead others to join you. And then Eleanor Roosevelt saying, for our own success to be real, it must contribute to the success of others. So it's interesting, all three of us really had some similarities, but I have to do my favorite, which is Madeleine Albright saying there's a special place in hell for women who don't help other women.
So in typical Hedy style, it's never a simple answer, but I see a very strong commonality, which is this struggling together and inclusion. So Hedy, that is fantastic. Similarly, I have one, and for me, it's not a quote, it's a chapter. And I think I'm spending a lot of time doing introspection and maybe more inner strength development. Lao Tzu, who's the author of the Tao, wrote in chapter 9 the following. It's better to stop short than to fill it to the brim. Over sharpen the blade, it will blunt. If you amass a store of gold and jade, no one can protect it. If you claim wealth and titles, disaster will follow. What you have to do is work and retire after the work is done. This is the way of the heaven. So for me, it's all about, practicing, are we enough, especially with the stress that is going on in life today. Do the work and let go and try to keep your ego in check and try to reduce being judgmental and try to go with the flow. And I think that's a practice that has been very important for me. So thank you for that. And thank you for everybody who shared some of the quotes. Again, we'll share these and the thoughts as well. So now let's get the audience involved. Let's play time. We're going to put a polling question out there. Paul, I'm going to ask you to throw it up there. I'm going to read it. See if it comes up. There we go. So if you could choose any age that you like to stay in emphasis on stay in, for the rest of your life, which would it be? So we're going to leave that for a while there. I want to come back because I want to have another conversation here with the folks here, and then we'll discuss what you guys responded. So something that I think a lot of people ask, including in the questions, was, you know, sharing a personal story. So I like for everybody here to share a personal story that that really demonstrates this idea of improvising and being original, and about reinventing yourself. Let's keep it to about 2 minutes, but Kelly, let's start with you.
Okay, want to start real?
Yeah, please.
So I've talked with everyone here for Chicago Innovation many times, and people were aware of my daughter Nora got diagnosed with cancer and going through that journey, and we lost her at 17 in August, so almost a year ago. And you know, going through that process, the care process, the loss, the trauma, the grief, you really do search for meaning. And I've been getting so many calls from people being like, the year you've had, how are you with everything that's going on? And the thing I have to say to them is like, I'm okay because the worst thing already happened to me and I'm still standing.
Amen.
The worst thing already happened to me.
Yeah.
And it's not that it's easy, and it's not that there's not triggers everywhere, but but the reality is, without joy, there is no joy without suffering. Back to our friend Lao Tzu. And so these things go together. And so there's a concept called post-traumatic growth, which is the ability to come out of these tragedies with a kind of renewed energy and strength and focus. And that's where I'm directing myself. You know, we're going through a huge battle at Second City right now. And as I say, I am here to do that work. I'm here for the transformation. I'm here to make us better, myself better, all of us better. And I have no, I know it's not going to be simple or easy, but, you know, I can get up in the morning and I can do the work.
Kelly, that's fantastic. I mean, my family has been impacted directly with mental illness, and I sympathize with your situation. And I think that the biggest theme of what you just said is everybody has life-changing events that are very dramatic and traumatic. It's the attitude that you approach it, and I'm very relieved to hear your attitude towards your circumstance and how you're dealing with it, and I'm sure that serves as an inspiration to a whole bunch of people here and in your life. So congrats to you.
Thank you.
Harry, let's hear your story.
Sure. You know, we all go through so many of these, and I was reflecting last night on which one. I guess the one that had the biggest impact still on now is when I was with Baxter Healthcare for many years, I just assumed I would stay there. And at one point, when it was determined I'd be leaving Baxter, I thought, oh, geez, am I going to run another company? What do I do? And I was very fortunate because the dean at Northwestern University, Kellogg, called and said, hey, this is fantastic. You're leaving Baxter. And I said, well, no, I'm just not used to this yet. And he goes, well, no, it is fantastic because I need you to teach. And I said, you don't mean like have a syllabus, grade paper? That's not how I run companies. And he said, I think you said you do whatever I told you to do. And he thought I was going to do finance because I had been a finance person starting off. And I said, you got all these brilliant PhDs. And he said, well, what do you have a calling for? What are you thinking about? And I said, I said, you know, I really love to have a small impact on the next generation of leaders. I think we need more leaders with values, and I'd like to focus on leadership values and ethics. And he said, that's fine, but you start in 2 weeks, you better get a syllabus together. And I spent 2 weeks in the Northwestern Library reading all the articles I was supposed to read 30 some years ago that I never got around to reading. They're actually pretty good. I should have read them a long time ago. And being able to teach leadership and really focus on this is a tremendous calling for me now that I just feel blessed every day to be able to have a small impact.
I love that. And Harry, I think I would say, let it be a lesson for everybody here listening, and including myself, that you found your calling later in life, and that is okay. That's a big deal. And having the self-awareness to that and nurture that, I think it's very powerful in terms of this whole theme that we're trying to talk as to how do you deal with uncertainty and life changes. And it's just embrace yourself, know yourself, figure out what you want to do and get there. Hedy, let's hear yours.
I wanted to tell a funny story, but I don't think I can. after listening to Kelly especially.
You can tell a funny story.
I can.
Come on, Hedy, tell a funny story.
Well, no, because the real issue on the reinvention in my life came in October when I lost the love of my life, my husband, in October. And so I've had to reinvent myself entirely. Who am I? What am I doing? What's important to me? How do I live my life now? How do I have the resilience and the focus to be able to reinvent who I am and what I am? So the funny story doesn't really fit because that's my personal story. And I've had to reinvent everything because I not only lost him, but I lost the fabulous life that we had together. But if you want, my little funny story is I've told this before, but my greatest strength is that I've failed it many, 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 many times in my life. And when people always want to hear, tell me about your success, I said, no, I'll tell you about my failures. And that includes 2 bad marriages and 1 great one. It just didn't last long enough. 9 colleges and universities. I couldn't make up my mind. Everything that I was supposed to be, I wasn't. So I wasn't a teacher and I wasn't a librarian. I also had a public service career. That was a dismal failure. And I left Washington and came back to Chicago, and we started the Women's Business Development Center, which has been an enormous success, not only because of me and my partner, Carol Dougal, but how, as a so-called semi-retired person, Amelia Domenko is the CEO and president of the WBDC and made it far better than I could have if I had stayed on. So invention is focus, which is hard when you're suffering and in sorrow, and resilience, which is also doubly hard when you have to figure out who you are and what you will become.
Hedy, I think you brought full circle what Kelly said earlier about you find strength through the struggle, and that is an opportunity for growth. And you're a freaking walking example of that, and I applaud that.
Thank you.
My story, I'll share my story, and is one of trying to find out, similar to Harry, doing what you love with what you're good at. I love technology, and because it's absolutely a powerful tool to change the quality of our lives. And so my most recent reinvention happened in 2014. My aunt is an agronomist and a university professor in Dominican Republic. That's where my mother is, and I'm the first in my family, so reciprocity is very big. So she asked me to talk to her students back then about technology. So I brought along with me in that talk a drone to make my talk interesting. Drones were kind of new, a piece of plastic that can fly. That was interesting. I didn't know anything about farming. I'm still learning. I invested in an ag tech company to cheat and to learn a little bit better. And I also brought along with me a very successful farmer from southern Minnesota. So what's interesting is through that curiosity, a few trips later, I went with a farmer and I came with a partner. I bought into a farm. I lived there for 3 years, and that has been the inception of the current business that I have. So my story is, again, trying to be connected with what I love. And this is a lane that I truly love. And a lot of it has to do with my interests and my connection to nature and the wonder of nature, and bringing technology to underserved markets. And those are the things that are very powerful. So I feel very much in the right lane. So let's pick up the poll and let's see what people said about their ages, and let's react to them. So Paul, what did the people say? So, wow, this is interesting. Wow. So we have a lot of millennials in the audience, 30 to 50. Some people feel very comfortable. The bell curve, I can see that. Any reaction to this? I have one. I think that there's some people who picked an age younger than themselves, and I asked to them, why do you want to relive your life?
Mm-hmm.
I feel very comfortable in my age. I don't know. What about you guys?
I'm the same. I picked 50 to 70. I feel like it was at 50 that I finally gave myself permission to be who I wanted to be truly. And also, like, as you get older, you just like, stuff falls off your back so much more easily than it does when you're younger. So, and that alone to me is worth the price of admission in this life.
Emotional freedom, yes, absolutely.
I'd like to follow Kelly because it seems that we have so many similarities. I said 50 to 70 as well, in part because I don't really give a damn about what anybody thinks. And I'm way beyond that now, so.
There's some serenity in that, absolutely,
Right,
absolutely.
I don't care. And I can accept responsibility and be accountable in a way, and I don't have to blame anybody else. And it's not so terrible to accept responsibility and blame when you've made mistakes. And making mistakes is not so difficult between 50 and 70. But after 70, not so good, because that's when you begin losing people in your life.
Yeah, I understand that. I understand that.
Much better.
So I'll put it as a note to kind of go back to people who said that they prefer to be under 10, and we'll leave it at that. That's very interesting. So, anyway, so we'll close on that one, and let's keep playing, and let's do another polling question.
Wait, you forgot Harry.
Oh, Harry, do you have a reaction to this?
Well, I actually put 50 to 70 as well, maybe similar to Kelly. I think as you get a little older, you really get enough perspective to realize what really matters and why. And I always mention to students that when you're younger, I think there's this focus of, well, what are people going to think? What are people going to say? I'd like to do that, but what would the reaction? And I learned the most, as I mentioned in the books, from going to nursing homes and listening to people in their 80s of what they would have done differently or what they enjoyed and what they didn't. And the fellow, Orlando, had the biggest impact on me is that one fellow who was in his 40s at one point didn't do what he wanted to do. And I saw him, he was in his 80s, and he said, I really wanted to start teaching, but I realized, what would people think? And he said, I'll tell you this much, when you're 85 and you ask yourself that question, it turns out you can break the world into two pieces. If you're really blessed, it may be as many as 10 people, and then there's everybody else. And those 10 people, those are people who truly love you. They truly care about you. They're the people when you say, oh, I got promoted, the first thing they say is, well, Kelly, are you taking care of yourself? Are you exercising? Are you healthy? So you don't have to impress those people because they just want you to have fun and be healthy. Then in terms of everybody else, he said, they're not bad people, but the most thing they're focused on is themselves. So he said, it's sitting here at 80 thinking, I was worried what people would think. Who are these people, right? Maybe I had to really think through what am I called to do rather than worrying about what everybody else thinks. And that doesn't happen, I think, when you're young, because you get so caught up in wondering what everybody else thinks. And they're not thinking that much about you.
Conform to yourself, not to society. Mm-hmm. I love that. So let's hit another question out there. Paul, let's ask you to put another one. And this is more another icebreaker and a little bit more perhaps controversial, but let me ask, how have you improved your life lately? And the choices are, you're spending a lot more time cultivating inner strength by virtue of everything that is happening. You're staying more active physically. You're trying to live in the present moment and trying to absorb everything that is happening. You're nurturing family time, emphasis on the quality, not the quantity, because we know that you're spending more time with the family, but it's this quality time that you're nurturing. Finally, I can avoid all the commute stuff and all the noise and all the distraction. I can dedicate to my work. Or feel free to answer with just not chat, but put in the QA any questions that you may have if you have another alternative. So we'll put that out and we'll leave it there. And then we're going to continue to play here and we'll come back to that polling question in a minute. But similar to that poll, let me go around here. How are you dealing with change and uncertainty today? I mean, we fight it and then we lean into it. So, I'm curious about understanding, from your perspective, what does that look like for you? Kelly, you want to take that?
Sure. So we got hired by a major soft drink company. You can guess who it is. It's one of two, to do a virtual workshop on resilience. And I was working on it, and my wife, who is also a longtime improv teacher and a comedy professor, was walking by and asked me what I was working on. And she goes, "Oh, I got an exercise for you. It's called Wish." And this is something she developed in her program. And what you do is have your students get a piece of paper and you have them write down a wish that they have right now that they could do. And for me, it was like swimming in salt water, like swimming in the ocean. And then you have them write down next to that, what is the emotion that they might feel when they did that thing? And so for me, it was like, I think it would be refreshing. She goes, okay, now in the third column, write down something you can do right now to feel that emotion. So I wrote down splashing water on my face, taking a walk, meditating. I mean, right? So this idea of, yes, it's bonkers out there, and there's all these issues. But back to our earlier point, you frame this. You bring your own context, and sometimes that can be very simple if you allow it to be. So I keep my body in shape. I work out every day. And then I try to simplify, become less complex, and look at what I can take care of in my immediate vicinity right now.
That is outstanding. I mean, I can't say enough about how much I hear, show up with your mind, show up with your body as a way to deal with what it's out of your control. So that's awesome, Kelly. Hedy, how about you? How are you dealing with uncertainty now?
Well, part of it is what I said before. I'm trying to figure out who I am and what I am and what I want from my life. And now on top of everything, we've got the coronavirus and finally the issue that has been really critical to me my whole life, which is the issues around social justice and equality. And that's what I've been doing my whole life is working on the empowerment of women and minorities, both in the civil rights movement and the peace movement and the women's movement and the human rights movement. And so for me, I have to be able to focus, which is very hard because of the loss of my beloved Mort, and learn compassion and understanding and how to be more self-aware, because since we do have the time, and now I'm alone, so I have the time to think about, be introspective about who I am, what is important in my life, what are my priorities, and who I want to connect with that makes me feel good and makes me pursue my goals, which is still the same as it has been all of my life. It's just harder today.
Hedy, I want to be like you when I grow up. The types of questions that you're asking yourself, I really hope that I had embrace a lot younger. That's a lifelong journey. So good for you. Harry, how about you?
Yeah, well, I really appreciate Hedy's comments and Kelly, because I think we're all, again, even I didn't know them, very, very similar. The way I think about all these things is that there's certain things that, if we're honest, can overwhelm all of us, right? Worry, fear, anxiety, pressure, stress, and it can just overwhelm you. And to me, the way of dealing with all of this is what I refer to as being self-reflective. Some people would refer to it as prayer. But as crazy as our lives are, as busy as our lives are, taking a little bit of time every day to ask yourself a series of questions. What are my values? Yeah. What's my purpose? What really matters? If I only have another week in my life, what am I going to accomplish and what matters? Is it success? Is it significance? Is it my resume or my legacy? And I think by taking some time to really think about that on a daily basis, what ends up happening is worry, fear, anxiety, pressure, and stress can be significantly reduced. You can never eliminate it. We're human, so welcome to the human race. But I think by being reflective enough, you figure out how you're going to deal with things. And I mentioned Orlando to students, I decided a long time ago, as a result of my daily self-reflection, there's only two things I ever have to do. Number one, I'll try to do the right thing with a lot of people's help, because I won't figure that out by myself. So I'll ask Kelly, I'll ask Hedy. I got to get some really good people that'll help me figure out in an uncertain world what's the right thing to do. And the second thing is I'll do the best I can do. And I got to tell you, it sounds overly simple, but if you can convince yourself that no matter what happens, I'll try to do the right thing, I'll do the best I can do, worry, fear, anxiety, pressure, and stress can be significantly reduced. And it has an enormous impact, right? So now we've got COVID, now we got racial injustice, we got all these things. It either overwhelms you or you say, okay, yeah, as my grandfather would say, that's why they call it work. So let's do the best we can and try to make a difference. But that ability to put it in perspective, I think, is key, or it will just overwhelm you.
You know, Harry,
I just want to, one addition is,
yeah.
there's a Yiddish expression, and it sounds much better in Yiddish than in English. And it is very much what you were saying. Man plans, women and men plan, and God laughs.
Yeah.
So we have to keep that in perspective as well.
Very good.
Yeah, and you know, I have my own set of things that I do in uncertainty, but I'm going to add to what you said, Harry. It's like, as executives, we have a tendency to kind of model and problem solve everything. And a lot of what I think people miss is creating space in your head to be quiet, to quiet the monkey chatter, in order to allow the possibility of what makes sense and listen to what is important to you. So for me, the uncertainty is more about, my therapist tells me this all the time, Orlando, you're too intense. You got to slow down. You know, smell the roses. It's like, slow down. So that's my practice on how to deal with uncertainty, is to slow down, listen to yourself, and understand what really is your North Star. So let's look at the poll results and let's react to it. It's going to be interesting. Okay. Wow. It's very, very evenly balanced, but there's some themes here. Nobody cares to work. Got it.
Good.
We have 6% of workaholics who have found their lane. Good for you, man. Good for you. Cultivating inner strength, living in the present moment seem to be winning. So there's a lot of individual development. Any reactions to this?
Yeah, I love it. I mean, this is what we're saying. I mean, they're finally more dedicated to my work. I mean, I don't know how you, I don't know how that happens. If you weren't dedicated before, but no, I mean, we need to work on ourselves. This is the thing. We're never done. This is not done. And the thing about improvisation is it's process oriented, and it can't be owned. So it is a thing that you do in communion with others. It's groups of people making something out of nothing, and to do that requires a great deal of practice. And this is the thing about great improvisers. They practice over and over again. Charlie Parker was like working the scales through a jazz metaphor, and it's the same in theater. It's not just showing up and being impromptu. That is a different thing. This is a practice, it's an art. And to do that, you have to cultivate, you've got to quiet yourself. You've got to be able to go in and listen deeply, listen to understand. And that requires, to be truly others focused, requires a great deal of practice.
It's outstanding. So let me move on into something else and keep the conversation going here. So all three of you have enormous strengths, and I want to pick on some of those things specific to the notion of the theme for this event, which is around improvisation and how do we improve our lives. We have a question that was submitted by Brad Gillette from BSC. When the wind of change blows, some people build walls, others build windmills. So thank you for that. That was a pretty interesting statement. Kelly, you centered your life around this idea of teaching improv and this idea of kind of making the best of a bad situation. Yes, and writing your own story and being part of that future. In this climate where people are seeking to become more responsive to this change, what are some of the core skills that you think about that people could embrace to put, their thoughts into action?
Well, first of all, in improvisation, you have to see all obstacles as gifts. So the ability to make mistakes work for you, that's huge. And the other thing is you're not doing it alone. I think we've all heard that phrase, your team is only as good as its weakest member. In improvisation, we say that that's not the case. The reality is your team is only as good as its ability to compensate for its weakest member, because one of us is going to be the weakest member at some point, and I'd rather be pulled up by my group than ostracized by my group. And this is the reckoning we live in right now with so many things. I mean, have you left the house recently? I mean, it's like COVID over. I mean, so we have a responsibility to each other, to care for each other, to protect for each other, to be kind, to be responsible, also to educate. That's a huge one. So we have to have the knowledge. I mean, it's kindness without wisdom doesn't get you as far as you need to go. So I think, taking the spirit of great improvisers, you have to put yourself out there. You have to make your partner look good.
Kelly, you're an inspiration. Let me ask you this. Somebody in the audience, Robert Snyder, asked this question for you.
Yeah.
So I want to get your perspective. You published a book, 2015, called Yes and. What new things have you learned that you didn't or that you couldn't, and now that may inspire the sequel? Give us your thought about
Yeah,
that.
so I've outlined the sequel, and I actually outlined the sequel before Nora got sick, and my editor said, all this information is great, but you don't have a story. So I do have a story now,
Oh,
and
wow. What a story.
and the story is also tied to the science work that we did. Because when we first went up to the University of Chicago, we did the yes and exercise for them that we teach people this idea around affirming and contributing in order to explore and heighten, which is what yes and is. And they said that's great. We got a bunch of research that can support that. But what happens when you are in serious disagreement? You can't yes and the idea across from you. What do you do then? And we're like, we don't know, and they didn't know. So we went across, they went and looked at the research, and we went and started improvising. And when we came together, we actually discovered this sort of fourth pillar of yes and, which is called thank you because. And the idea is if you're in a conversation with someone that you need to stay in that conversation, it's difficult and you don't agree, the way you stay in is by thanking someone for the opinion they just shared, even if you don't agree with it. And the because is crucial. The because is finding some point of agreement, however small. And so, you know, my daughter had friends whose parents were anti-vaxxers. And this was a problem, and but I like them, and they love us, and so we needed to stay in this conversation. I remember saying, "Thank you for sharing that, because you love your girl so much, you don't want to see her get hurt by these vaccines. I feel the same way, and I don't want to get hurt, have my girl get hurt." So I think in the times we're living in, especially right now, when we're blocking and we're canceling at will, and not saying that the fight isn't right in there, but again, we're not going to do it by being completely separate. And thank you because at least gives you an orientation to keep the conversation going.
Kelly, thank you for your gift, because you're a great human.
Thank you.
Seriously.
Not always.
Well, a work in progress.
This is work in progress, man.
I know how it goes. I think we all share that.
Yeah, we do.
Alex from New Moon sent this quote. So I want to share this because I think this is a good segue for Harry. "I may lose a battle, but I shall never lose a minute." Harry, you published a book that has to do with time. You're 168, which reference the number of hours that are in a week, and make the most out of them. What's your biggest insight in the process of writing this book?
Yeah, I found it very, very interesting that people, in very cases, if they're not self-reflective, really have no idea where they spend their time. And so, you'll ask somebody and say, "Hey, Orlando, would you like to go to lunch?" And the person will say, "Well, I just don't have the time." And I think to myself, no, you've got the time. You got 168 hours in a week, right? That's 24 times 7. Now, maybe it's not a priority, and that's okay. But to say you don't, well, I love before Kelly's comment, I exercise every day. Well, I exercise every day. And when I run into other people, they'll say, "Well, I don't have the time." No, you've got the time. Now, if you figure out it's not a priority, well, okay, then why don't you just admit that? And I'm very, very focused on making sure that every single person knows where they spend their time and why. And I find it very, very interesting that, sometimes you'd say to yourself, well, yeah, but people know. And the example that I use is that I had an executive one time who said to me, "I'm having trouble with my marriage. I don't have a good relationship with my children. Harry, I'd really like to talk to you." And I said, "Well, hey, I don't have any answers." "No, but you have opinions, and I know you try to keep a balance. I'd love to talk to you." And I said, "Well, hey, I'll call the guy Charlie. Charlie, love to chat with you. Hey, tomorrow's Saturday. Why don't you come to the house and we can chat a little bit?" "Well, I can't do it tomorrow. I'm playing golf tomorrow." I said, "Okay, well, hey, on Sunday, after church, do you want to stop by?" "Well, I'm golfing on Sunday." Now, being a math guy, I'm thinking to myself, I think it takes 5 hours to play golf. That's 10 hours. Now, here's how open I am. If playing golf is more important to you than your children, now some of us may say, "Oh, I wouldn't want to say that." The beauty of admitting that is that you wouldn't be surprised. So, because one of the great things about being self-reflective is that it minimizes the surprise. In fact, that's why the second chapter of the book, Orlando, is literally called, "Why Are You Surprised?" Okay? If you decide you don't want to have important relationships, well, then that's okay. But I think taking the time to figure out where you spend your time. And, I tell the students, I was at Kellogg, was that a year ago too? No, it was 40 years ago. So, I went from being 25 to 65 like that. I said, snap of the fingers, I'd be 105, but I won't be around. Now, that's either depressing or you say, no, it's not. I'll just make the most of every day. We've got a certain amount of time. You make the most of every day. And that's why I think it's important to realize, where are you spending your time? And is it linked to what you say is most important? And if it's not, why not?
Wow. I have an add-on to what you just said related to managing time. You know, our humanity leads us to be curious, and we are all curious. And when I talk to kids and I reflect on this, I'm curious, but I'm a doer. We waste our time doing so much consuming of social media, et cetera, in the interest of being curious. No, I'm just loading, I'm just learning, I'm just translating that time into the doing, into the action means so much. So often we rationalize that being curious is a way of progress. But if you don't manage the time to be able to know how to respond, to be a producer instead of a consumer of information, that's magical. So that's awesome. Hedy, let me go to you. Many people, especially, obviously with your life, how difficult it is to deal with life-changing events. And something that we're seeing right now for other people is, and entire institutions of communities, is that they're experiencing a cluster collective changing event. Everything is changing. You absolutely have dedicated yourself to these social progressions.
Yes.
Share your insight. What happens, when people now are essentially waking up in these institutions, they're asking, how do we reinvent ourselves and how do we pursue progress?
Well, what I'm seeing now in terms of social change is not dissimilar from what I felt in 1968 and the social changes that we were hopeful that we could finally make those changes after Martin Luther King's death, after Kennedy's death, after Robert Kennedy's death. So I think the major thing is that unity is one thing, but how hard that is to be able to prioritize our actions so that we know it isn't just our empathy and our hearts and our minds, but what are the activities that we can do together to make the right changes. And it also has to do with who are our leaders and how do we select our leaders based on who is going to have more influence, more impact. And that goes for leadership in our businesses, as well as in our politics, as well as in our lives. I think when we started the organization, the Women's Business Development Center, we were the first really to even look at women's business ownership and the impact that could have on families, on women's lives, and on our economy. And no one took it very seriously. But, we were tenacious and persistent, and we believed we had to prioritize what we were doing to be able to create social change. The organization has gone through major transitions. And that, it's gone from a very small organization to a very large organization that now has enormous impact on issues like access to capital for women and minority-owned businesses. And that is in collaboration with good leaders who care enough, like our governor, our Cook County president, and our mayor, to make it work and to collaborate. That was the other thing, is, as I was saying earlier, we must collaborate. We must find ways of working together with organizations, not always with the same agenda, but who have a common agenda for social change and for equality and for social justice. And that's hard because people don't like to work together very well. But on a personal level, for me, it's a cliche. I mean, it's make every day significant and important and be grateful for every day. And as I went through the illness and death of my beloved husband, it was not every day, it was every moment, to make every moment count and to consider the impact of it and to be understanding of what gratitude really means.
Hedy, there's something very powerful there, and that speaks to why you're so driven and why you have so much energy. And
I'm
everybody
old,
has
too.
no, everybody has this notion that their life is a life of service. Let's agree. I mean, we all have that, but the way that
I think
manifests in
everyone
you.
does.
Well, but here's the thing:
Thank
you really care about this notion of legacy. You really care about how am I leaving the world when I'm not participating in it, and having that sense of responsibility as being the fuel of what gets you up in the morning to actually kind of do something about what you're supposed to do, or you think you want to do, or you want to do, however you want to frame it, right? I think that's very powerful. So I sincerely applaud that energy that you have, and that you're the embodiment of living a life of service, but acting on that, not just
Thank
thinking
you.
about it. So that's
I used to wake up every morning and say, okay, here I am. Now it's time to change the world. That's all.
So I'm going to throw one more question, and I'm going to keep it, this is going to be a quick drill because I want to jump into the Q&A, and we have a handful of questions here coming, and I'll invite other people to continue to ask questions. And I've seen that we've answered some of them, hopefully here through this discussion, which is amazing, by the way. So this is amazing to get to hear your stories today, and thank you for being personal. But here's a quick drill, and I'll throw it out there, and one person will pick it up, and we'll pick another one. What's your why for today? What's your why? I mean, I think, Hedy, you answered that, but let me throw it to Kelly. What's your why for today?
I kind of answered it already. That I'm here to do the work, and that's my work, and that's my community's work, and that's my friends' work. But it's also the work of the people that who don't think like me. And I think it's vital. If we are looking for inclusion, true inclusion, it means talking to people whose opinions are different than ours, and who look differently than us, and maybe behave differently as us. Not to put yourself in danger, not to put your body in danger, or any of that. But we have to talk to each other.
I hear you, Harry. What's your, what is your biggest fear, and how has that influenced what you do today?
I don't think it really was fear, but a little bit like Kelly, to me, it's just very, very clear. I'm here for a very blink of an eye. How can I be the positive impact on as many people as I can, consistent with what I think are important values that would make the world a better place? And to be able to do that and have that impact and share your views and listen carefully to every other perspective, that seek to understand before you're understood, and be as positive an impact as you can possibly be, the short time you have. That's the way I think.
That's outstanding. So let's cover some questions. We have some questions here from people typing in. So the first one comes from Paul. How do social people, those who need regular human contact and interaction in the flesh, cope with the Zoom world? Kelly, I think you mentioned this idea of how important physical interaction is compared to. So how do we cope with that, given that we're all cooped up?
So one of the things that I'm talking to people about is there's more to communicating with other people than Zoom. Calling someone on the phone is a different experience. You might have neighbors that you can talk to over a fence. There's lots of different ways that we can, engage our people. But talking about Zoom for a second, this is a TV show. We've produced TV at Second City, so we were able to adapt to this a little bit more quickly. But I think that for everyone, you have to recognize that if we're going to be, and look, I don't think this is going away even when we're back in offices. I think corporate America has discovered that they won't have to pay rent, and they're not going to. I wonder what downtowns are going to look like, because I think that this is always going to be part of the world we're in. So get some decent lighting, make sure your connectivity is good. And a lot of times that's just calling and having them come out and replace some wires. It doesn't have to be expensive. And then, one of the things that we do in our virtual workshops is we have a musical director. We got a playlist when you come on this thing. The idea of incorporating things like music into your meetings or other stuff, just to make it not the sort of drag that it is, especially when you're sitting in a chair for, 10 hours. And let's be honest, all of us are, I think this is broadly true that most of us are working more at home. We're working on weekends, we're working at evenings, we're not giving ourselves breaks that we would normally do. We're not having that sort of hallway chat that leads to a lunch. So I think, protecting ourselves in our personal spaces while we adapt and grow with this technology. Because look, it was coming anyway, right? With the AI and the robots are coming. So the thing we need to tap into is what makes us most human, because that's the jobs of the future, are the ones that rely on divergent thinking and creativity and innovation and all the human things, all the things. Robots cannot improvise, and they're not funny.
Absolutely. So. I'm finding myself also on the physical place doing walkathons in the morning with my team. I mean, practicing social distancing, but just that by itself is enormously powerful. Tom, thank you for your question. There's another question here. I'm going to put it out there. It's very interesting. I think it was Woody Allen who once said, if you want to make God laugh, show him or her your plan. So what's the role or the importance or irrelevance of having a plan at this point in one's life? So this is obviously, a question around when everything around me seems so disastrous. How do we come up with a plan? Harry, what's your sense?
Yeah, this is one that I actually was thinking a lot about in this latest book. And in fact, I literally call it being planful and have spontaneity. And people say, well, wait a minute. No, it's one or the other. And boy, Harry, I don't like all this planning because then I'm locked in. I have no degrees of freedom. And anybody that's planful realizes it's one of those things that almost runs contrary, is that the more planful you are, the more flexibility you have. And for the younger people there, and Kelly, you're nodding, it's a little bit like I use that example when we were in school and you have this term paper, you got 2 weeks to do it. Well, if you're thinking about it, do a couple pages every day. But it was always, I had a roommate who literally the last night brings in 20 books at midnight with a cigar, and it's like, okay, I got 8 hours and I'm doing this. Well, the reality is if that night I came up to him and said, hey, guess what? I got some tickets to a movie. What do you think? Well, he can't go because he has no degrees of freedom. And I tease my students, and maybe I'll take, maybe somebody in this 163 people may have a comment, Orlando, in terms of helping me out, but I'm pretty planful, right? I pretty much know, what I'm going to do, the next 360 days. I kind of have that in that plan. Now, with that said, if Kelly or somebody calls me tomorrow and says, hey, I got 2 tickets for Bruce Springsteen in Atlanta Wednesday, I'll be there. Okay, so there's not a question I will be there. So this whole idea of you have a plan, but realize the plan that we set up at midnight tonight of what we're going to do tomorrow and the 10 things that we're going to do, by 9 o'clock the next morning, 2 of those don't even exist anymore. And there's 3 things that are now going to hit you. So you're planful, but you're also constantly iterating through because there's something else that has a higher priority. That's part of being planful and having spontaneity.
Tom, I have, that's awesome. And I'll add to that, again, going back to this idea of my own baggage of letting go. Having a plan today is less about that and more about directionality. Pick the next step that you need to make. Forget about the rest. Things will get figured out. So it's all about, are you directionally correct in the step that you need to take next? Because you're right, it's going to change no matter what. So that directionality is important from an intention, but from an execution, just worry about the next one in front of you, 3 steps ahead. A lot of things can happen. Hedy, I have a question for you here from Chris. I know you being a social butterfly, and now this is not quite the case for you. So this is an ideal question for you. Chris is asking, how do you hack serendipity? Meaning, how do you increase the probability of having amazing serendipitously, experiences with people rather than just leaving it to chance? In a Zoom world, in a digital world, it's very difficult to engage in new people and experiences. What do we tell Chris?
It's hard to answer that question because of the circumstances of our environment. But what I've learned in this time of major introspection and self-awareness and quiet, because it's quiet, and I'm not used to being quiet, is what are my priorities? And how can I get as much out of the things that I can do as I possibly can? First, I've prioritized people, empathy, compassion, being there for people in a way that I don't think I had as much time or as much awareness in the past. And it's to be there for people who are friends, who may be suffering in some of the ways that I have, and being there for them. It isn't exactly serendipity, but it's because of the circumstances of our lives right now. It allows us to be able to prioritize people and their needs. And that's really important. In terms of serendipity and how I can enjoy things in a way that I used to, I get on my bicycle. I've been doing that since I've been 7 years old. And I'm riding around the city. I can't go on the bike path. I can go in the park. I found the Shakespeare Garden in Lincoln Park and watched the birds. I mean, whoever had time to sit and listen and watch the birds? I fall in love with purple martins on Montrose at the nest there and watch the purple martins as they're flying and swooping around. You know, these are things that I can enjoy in a way that I really didn't give myself the time or the energy to do.
Yeah, just put yourself out there. No, that's perfect. Guys, guess what? When you're having fun, time just flies. So we have one more question that I'm going to take here, and then I'm going to close it and throw it back to Luke. But Kelly, this is a question specific to you, but Michelle is asking, you mentioned about this post-traumatic growth. And the question is there any website or book that Michelle or the rest can review on that topic?
Yeah, there's a terrific new book by Scott Barry Kaufman called Transcend, where he is basically looking at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and updating them. And so he has a whole chapter that deals with this subject matter, and it's all data and evidence-based. Scott's a dear friend of mine. He hosts the Psychology podcast, and the book is really fascinating in the sort of various discoveries of what we know about human behavior in the brain as it relates to the human condition. And by the way, the funniest thing is Maslow never put it in a pyramid. Some consultant did that.
Interesting.
And it got stuck because it's like that's sort of like this achievement, and that's not what he meant at all. All those different things are happening at different times, and they need to be tended to. So I think it's a really you like, man, this consultant just ruined it.
Wow. Thank you for that. Guys, I can't thank you enough. And I'm sure that people who are here also appreciated this. I got to do one more gesture for the audience here. We need to high five everybody here. So I'm going to high five. Let's high five and let's say, hey guys, suffering happens alone, struggling happens together. And I think that's important for people to realize. Luke, thank you for the opportunity. Back to you.
Well, I'm going to start with my extra high five. That was unbelievable. That was one of the best panels that I think Chicago Innovation has ever done. So Kelly, Hedy, Harry, Orlando, from the bottom of our hearts, thank you for everything that you shared. You know, I know we started off talking about quotes and sharing famous quotes. I think there was about 1,000 new quotes that just came from this conversation that people will be repeating for years to come. And, you know, Orlando, I know you talked from the beginning about your goal was to keep this real. And without a doubt, that's what this was. You know, I laughed, I started to cry twice during this conversation. And, you know, having these kinds of open, honest conversations is something that we're committed to hopefully producing more of through Chicago Innovation. So, you know, we encourage our entire committee to stay connected to us and to these four amazing people. And from applying for our women's mentoring co-op, which applications are open right now for mentees, to being part of our Ageless Innovators mentoring program. You know, so much of what we're doing is aimed at personal growth, which is exactly what this conversation was. So we hope that everyone was inspired, was touched. I know I certainly was. And you're right, Orlando, struggling happens together, but we're all in this together. So stay well, stay together, and we'll look forward to seeing you all soon again.